And then I'll give you an extra thing. I'll be doing an extra presentation and discussion just for the final assignment, the big assignment, okay? It's not compulsory, but it's a good idea to come.
When will it be?
It will be after I've given you your assignment,
Yeah, but like,
which will be second last.
Will it be like during class time? Or?
No, it will be an extra slot. So if you want to come along, it will be an extra 2 hours. I always do this because the assignment is so demanding, okay? And I want you to feel 100%. So we actually look at it, you read it in advance, we get together and we discuss it.
do you have any idea so far on dates that we can just
Yeah,
look
so
at
the
now?
second last lecture is when I'll hand it out. And then after the last lecture is when we'll have the discussion. We'll find a slot that suits everybody. Okay, so I'll send something out. Do you look?
I don't know the dates. I'm trying to
Yes.
plan for work. So
Okay, well now that you are. So I'm shocking with dates. So if you look at your calendar, what was sent to you, and I'll do that, I'll make sure that you have your assignment by the second last lecture. I will not discuss it except to introduce you to it so that you can get reading. Okay, once you've gotten reading, that's fine, and then we'll have an extra lecture just to discuss the assignment, because I don't want the assignment to be merely a test. I want the assignment to be a learning experience. We have far too few sessions on this course, because the university insists on having everything uniform no matter what the topic is. So I used to have 15 lectures, now I've got 12. And, no concession is made for it, so other things don't change. So, do you know where I'm going with this? Do you understand? Thanks. Can someone take out the... Has anybody got the thing?
You have a really destroyed copy.
Okay. But it's negotiable, the date, eh?
Okay, here you go.
So, have you got the dates for the other assignments? The big assignments?
No.
No.
So, I think
Was this the very, very final one?
yeah.
Okay.
So I think
What
yeah,
is lecture 12?
lecture 12. It was just lecture 12. What you mean? What day it is?
Yeah.
It's the 10th of October. It's a
10th of October. So if we meet on the 17th of October?
yeah, because we have 3 weeks allocated.
Yes.
And then I think
What day?
It's a Wednesday. October, Wednesday. It's a Wednesday. Do you prefer another day?
no Wednesday. No, Wednesday is better because I think everyone's organized with their work. That's their class.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. All right. So have you got a little novel for me? No, I didn't mean it. I meant a little novel. Huh? Okay. All right. You've got another 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to other things. set up.
Different versions of it.
I know. And as my son keeps on saying to me, he says there will always be a mistake somewhere in the code. So no two versions in the world are totally identical. Okay. All right. Let's get started. Okay, can you take notes today, please? You can give me your little pieces of paper at the end. All right, so you're going to be looking at illustrations and graphs. Okay, and that reading it's straightforward, but you need to do it carefully and slowly. Please keep these articles that I've given you as something that you refer to. So look after them nicely, put them in plastic sleeves. They are very good content to go back to. Okay, so as you know, some of the resources that I give you are resources for good. Okay, just like Newhart's rules, basically. I've told you which areas of Newhart's rule to concentrate on in the feedback that I gave you on your assignments. Okay, so it's up to you now to look at those chapters. If I said you're weak at especially the comma, you need to go back and have a look. And you need to just read, and you need to pay attention to commas in books that have been well edited. Okay. All right. So artwork today I want to talk about, I don't want to talk about photographs. I want you to learn about that by yourselves. I mean, it's so dead easy. It just needs to be mentioned and you'll remember. So for example, if you've got a person and you're concentrating on that person and the picture has got a whole lot of background that isn't relevant, okay, you're obviously going to crop. Okay, and you're going to make things bigger or smaller, and you're going to remember what they are going to look like on the page in your book when you give instructions. But mostly that is up to the typesetter. But if you give the typesetter rubbish, then it'll be rubbish in and rubbish out. Something that is far too bitty, or something that is that has pixelated, you know, it's not okay to supply that. You have to go and find alternative images, right? So I think more and more, because of the way that editors are working on websites and clicking through, and where the image is paramount, basically, you need to develop those skills over time. So every opportunity that you have to develop some more expertise in terms of artwork is important, and try and take it up and try and do the extra work. Okay, sometimes Peg runs workshop on the artwork, and if that is the case, I will let you know. Maps are also an issue. Okay, so I'll discuss all of that quickly today. All right, so let's say I'm doing children's artwork. I'm doing a children's book. Okay, anyone tell me how you're going to position yourself as the editor towards the artwork?
I don't really know what you mean.
Okay. How will you position yourself towards artwork in a young children's book? What will be your approach? Okay, as an editor, normally you deal with words. Okay, that's all I'm trying to get at. So you deal with words, and you are visual up to a point, but you're not that visual. But the younger you go, the more visual you need to become. Okay, so what will be absolutely paramount in a young children's book, and with you as the editor? What will you be checking?
In the images.
Yeah, in the images and the text.
Well, there are nothing's complicated, I think.
Age appropriate.
Yeah.
Age appropriate, okay.
Do the words correspond with the images?
Yes, do the words correspond with the images? What sort of book is it? Are images making part of the statement, and the words, are they another part of it? Or, because sometimes you can have in children's books you can have almost a sequence of content through the artwork and then another sequence of content through the words. Okay, so you might have something about cars, and through the images you're being taught a whole lot of things about cars and how they differ and what they, the basic parts. And the narrative might be around a family that's going somewhere in a car. Okay, so the two can work very well together, but what should you be doing if you are asked to edit something? You should make sure that you should ask to be able to speak to the illustrator. Okay, so absolutely, it's paramount that you actually, and if you can't have a face-to-face, that you at least have a Skype meeting where you say, what is your vision? What are you trying to do? What are you trying, what is your aim in doing the drawings in this way, so that I can understand. You need, okay, it's a two-person, it becomes a two-person job. So of course you'll be checking for, is the language level appropriate? You need to make sure that you're not deleting words that are there to be learnt. Okay, so for example, a word might look a little bit difficult, but it's part of the learning experience. It's part of the vocabulary that has to be acquired. Okay, because kids like to be familiar, but they also like to be stretched. So for them, new words are quite magical, quite often. So you have to exercise your judgment again. What is the point? And how does the artist interpret the brief? And how are you going to get there together? Okay, so again, what am I doing? I'm stressing the relationships that you have as an editor with other people in the production process. Okay, so we've done something very mechanical recently where we've told the typesetter, I want this to be an A heading and this to be a B and that to be a C, and there you need to insert that, and that's a caption, and okay, and there's a design, and you follow these basic features. That was quite mechanical. This would be far less mechanical and far more exploratory at this level. Okay, you might get a chance to work on some of those books because there's a great big push at the moment to produce more books for children in South Africa. Okay, let's move on to primary school level. What am I going to have a preponderance of? I'm going to have art. Obviously, I'm going to have illustrations of things and maybe even simple processes with, so if you're doing the water cycle, you'll get a few labels and some big arrows and some very clear artwork showing water evaporation and what happens to the water as it hits the mountain, that kind of stuff. Okay, but it'll be drawn in, again, there, you need to check that whatever's been handed in by the author hasn't been taken out of another book and just clumped in there. Okay, so the more experienced your author and the more in touch with what it is that school books do and learners need from their books, the less of a problem you're likely to have. But very often you have authors who are new to the job and they don't quite get that whatever they've given you a diagram and they're expecting the artist to adapt it down. Okay, and you have to be very careful in what you ask an artist. Maybe the artist isn't capable, maybe the artist doesn't know about adapting it down. So if that kind of artwork comes to you, that kind of rough artwork, what can you do? What are you entitled to ask for? Okay, but you've been given that as a reference. that is your reference. That's what the author has supplied as a reference. Because often while you're editing, you're checking, you're looking at the artwork that's being submitted, right? Okay. So let's say you're working freelance and you've got this. What will you do?
Like a simple draft.
No, it's been given to you and it's not as simple as it should be. And I'm saying you can't assume that the artist is going to simplify it as much as it needs to be simplified.
I wouldn't say, I mean, you can't redraw it because, but I mean, you could.
Whose responsibility is it to supply you with decent artwork? Artwork that you can use?
I would think.
The author. Okay, so it is the author. You can produce nice artwork. I don't know why this is not. Yeah, I don't know what it's doing. Can we just ignore it? Okay. All right, so while you edit the text for, let's say, a primary school book, you're going to do what? You're going to check that the language is appropriate, that your punctuation is done correctly, that the vocabulary is appropriate, that it matches the needs of the curriculum. That it's grammatically correct. What else? That it's factually correct. If anything sounds a little bit, because a lot of teachers write from memory, and actually they don't have the very, very photographic memory that you need, really, to write without checking things. But a lot of people don't check themselves because they're so used to sprouting what they consider to be the facts. Okay, so you will do some fact checking. All right, and then you will make sure that the visuals are appropriate, that the visuals support the text or add to the text. And just as you check that everything in the text was age appropriate, you're going to check that the visuals are age appropriate. If you've got a graph there, you need to see in the syllabus, have they covered this kind of graph? Or are they covering it in the course of the year? It's no use giving them a bar graph if they only do bar graphs the following year. Okay? But to a large extent, you will be aware of all these things, but the author needs to get them right. So if the author has given you a drawing of a water cycle that is actually aimed at grade 8s, and you're now writing for grade 4s, or editing for grade 4s, there is a problem. Okay, it needs to be simplified, but you don't just say to the artist, simplify. You give the artist what they need to do. You tell them what is involved. So, in other words, authors often just introduce something and then they say, make it age appropriate. But, so, at that point, I don't accept it, I say, as part of, either as part of my editorial brief, or I'm doing artwork separately because I want to speed up the artwork. Remember, we've discussed this before. Sometimes you'll look at your manuscript and then you'll go straight to the artwork and make sure that that's okay, because artwork takes longer than editing. Okay, so you think, okay, let me get the artwork brief 100% and then the artist can get on with it while I get on with the text. Okay, does that make sense? So it's a way of saving time and money in the production process. Okay, so you are entitled to ask the author to supply proper images, yeah? Okay, so appropriate images. So if they must draw the flipping cycle the way that it's supposed to look. Okay. All right, I don't know how much you've done in costing, when you looked at costing of the job in terms of artwork. Do you know the different costing models? Okay. Okay, so in some cases, especially in South Africa, where authors are not supported and they produce their work in the early hours of the morning, and they you know, for most teachers or for most writers at the school level, or even at the FET level, or even, I mean, even at university level, scholarly level, people find it really difficult to actually have enough time. So if you're a typical academic, you're teaching and you are being forced to do crazy research, it's publish or be damned. And then all the marking and everything else, is very little time to actually do other work, okay, or write a book or whatever. So in those circumstances, many publishers in South Africa carry the costs of having the artwork drawn or developed, or carry the costs of sourcing the photographs, choosing the photographs, sourcing a choice of photographs, etc., etc. Okay, but in some other models, you as the author, you're asked to carry all the costs of the artwork, of getting the permissions for the artwork, of having the right artwork drawn. Sometimes in a technical book, you're asked to produce the diagrams. Okay, so you've got something scientific, something technical. Often part of the brief will be, okay, can you actually produce the diagrams using such and such a program, and that's part of your job. That's part of the manuscript that you hand in. So there are lots of different costing models. If you're the publisher of a book that we spoke about at the very beginning, a very young children's book, it's usually going to be a model where the publisher carries the costs of the artwork, and then you've got different models there. Either they will buy the artwork outright, and it becomes the publisher's, and the artist relinquishes all rights to it, or the artist will keep all rights and will get paid a certain sum, a different sum. Okay.
Yeah, please, isn't it
Yeah.
relative to the ownership of copyrights? To say, if the author who owns the copyrights, then obviously he has to go for the artworks. So, where an author has brought a manuscript, and the publisher would now look for images or illustrations, then when it comes to owning the copyright, what happens?
But what are you talking about? I'm talking about the artwork copyright. The copyright on the text isn't a big deal because it's a short text. Yeah.
Say who provides the illustrations.
No, you can hire an artist. You can say, this is the book, we want you to produce 8 drawings, and at the end, we'll pay you. But then we own it.
Or the publisher pays.
That's what I'm saying. There's a different types of models based. I mean, if the publisher thinks that they will make absolutely nothing out of the project, they might demand more out of the author. Okay. They might think it's worth publishing as a book, but the costs are too high. So the author will get smaller royalties, or the author will get a smaller payment. Okay. So for a lot of school books, for example, authors are they're not actually given royalties, or they might have royalties of something like 1% or 1.5%. But while they're writing, when they write and they deliver certain aspects of the manuscript, then they get paid for that. Okay, because, I mean, if you're going to write teacher's guides, you're never going to see any money for them. And you are, if you care about the teachers that you're writing for, you're going to produce really great detailed guides with lots of examples and lots of ideas for what you can do in the classroom and how you can keep the kids interested and all that kind of stuff. That's hard work. And very often these guides are like 200 pages long and they're single spaced. Okay, so the model now, and sometimes the publishers just give it away to please the government. They say, yeah, all these learners' books and free teachers' guides. Okay, but because they respect their profession, the teachers' guides are not complete rubbish. Some of them are really nice, beautifully done. So then they're not going to pay royalties, but they'll pay you as you get the work done, and they'll write it off as part of the whole development of the whole project. Okay, so have you done costing? Yeah. And have you done different scenarios? Differently from now, from the way I'm doing it now.
Yeah, I have.
Have you done costing scenarios?
Well, we've done.
Like no, like what I'm talking about. You can either get paid for the work, or you can get royalties, or you can. Okay.
Like we know of that, like we know
Yes.
the advances and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we haven't like sat and done costing sheet if the person got an advance or something like that.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's fine. I mean, it's an introduction to the whole of publishing course. Okay, so right, but whatever happens, you need to be able to have a quality product. Okay, and you've got to get as much out of the author as possible. And usually, it is part of the author's responsibility to produce a decent artwork brief. Okay, and I would say that from experience of school books, 50% of the time they get there, and 50% they don't. And some 25% of the time they don't get there at all. So you end up putting the artwork brief together. Okay, but ideally, as you're going through the stuff, the visuals are part of it. The author needs to be asked to provide better visuals if they haven't provided. And they need to provide them quickly so that you can then finalize your brief and hand over to your artist. Okay, so in children's books and school books and children's encyclopedias and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of line drawing. Okay, that is done in color. So obviously that has to be briefed quite carefully. What I was getting at one point, and which people seem to be surprised by, is I said, what will there be a lot of in these children's books? And I said there will be lots of pics of places, and there will be pics of things and processes, but there'll be lots of pics of people. Okay, so if you look at children's books, there are lots and lots of depictions of people. And if you're talking about processes or the environment or activities or processes, usually in those pictures there will be people. And people bring a lot of trouble with them when they have to be drawn. Okay. I could just say it's difficult to draw people. Okay. So if you think that the average artwork is, let's say, a third of a page, in color, by the artist is paid about 300 to 330 rand. Okay. What do you think might give you issues? Well, drawing people requires what?
Permission? Permission?
No, I'm not talking about drawing history, current personalities. That's something else. Can you see there? Do you need to move?
I'm enjoying this.
You're enjoying it? Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Maybe skill.
Yeah, skill. So you don't want people to look like cartoons, unless you're drawing in a cartoon style. You don't want people to end up looking like cartoons. You don't want people to look stereotypical. Okay, so everybody's got to look like an individual. Okay, you've also got to be representative. Okay, you've got to remember to represent everybody in the country. You've got to remember to include people who have disabilities. So if you're showing a classroom situation, then you should be inclusive. There's that. Whenever you've got a group, what have you got happening? Interaction. Okay, and depicting those interactions also involves skill, because you've got to be able to show expression, movement, dress, range of ages maybe. Okay, so all of that is very, very skilled work. So, and I know some amazing artists in in the school book sector who produce beautiful, beautiful little pics. Family at supper, kids playing soccer outside, and it's just beautiful. And you think, oh, and you did all this for 330 Rand. Okay, 330 Rand seems like a lot, but it's not, because remember, they do the rough. And with people, the rough can't be too rough, because you've really got to be able to see what you're going to be getting to make sure that they're getting it right. So the rough is pretty close to final, and then after that, they still have to color it all in. Okay, and then it's, you know, got to be allowed to be ready, and then it's got to be scanned and all of that kind of stuff. So, right. So what will help the artist to get those drawings right? When you write your brief, what are you going to be doing?
Being very specific.
Very specific. Thank you. Okay, so you're going to say, I want to see a girl and she's poorly dressed and it's winter and the leaves are blowing outside, there's wind, and she's huddling in this little, tiny little jersey, you know, that kind of stuff. So your descriptions have to be very, very specific. If I move away from artwork to photography, if I'm discussing a certain plant, that's the plant that I have to show. I can't show an approximation, okay? And it's the same with drawings. I don't want to show approximations of the scenes that I want to brief so I can get back what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Who's responsible for giving the artist the art brief?
Okay, so the author is supposed to put a really decent brief together. And so what I've been trying to say is when it comes to technical stuff, how things look, how they're made, the cycle, that you really must expect. Okay, that's why I will send that brief right back. I'll send that reference, I won't send it back, because I don't want you incurring costs. Being a publisher, I'm being cheap, okay? So I won't send it, but I'll say, excuse me, this is not the right, you know, if you look at the syllabus, that's what you need to show. Please, would you send another rough for the artist so that they can get it right? Okay. Sometimes people send you something that they've taken out of another book. Exactly. They say, oh, so you're working for Macmillan and now they send you something out of a Heinemann book. That can't be reproduced just as it is. The artist is going to have to make a whole lot of changes so it doesn't look the same. Okay, if that can't be done at a high level, sometimes somebody has produced the table of whatever. Okay, some highly skilled technical stuff, and that's it. And producing that table has involved the input of loads and loads of data. You can't just take that table. You are stealing their intellectual property. Okay, so if you want to use it, you ask the publishers, can you use it? If not, they're going to have to find another way around it. Okay, so if it comes to the crunch, your author must supply their own rough of what they want the artist to do.
But if the data come from annual reports and stuff, but you use that to produce a graph?
Well, if you want to go through all the work and you produce your own thing, then that's fine. And a lot of authors do that. And most tertiary authors wouldn't be seen dead using somebody else's stuff. They will work through it again. And they'll tell you what sources. And if there's a new source, the latest source. Let's say this table was produced but 5 years ago, now there's more data to put in and it might change the shape of the line or whatever it is that you're using. They will redo all the calculations. Okay, so in a way, the higher up you go, the less of an issue it is, and the lower down you come, the more difficult it becomes to get your meanings across. Okay, because you've got to be so careful. You've got issues of race, issues of class. Okay, so when we were doing some books on Lesotho, we had an illustrator, and all the kids were dressed in rags, you know, and he thought he was being very representative and showing it like it is. Okay, but the educational authorities were really not happy with that. First of all, they said not everybody's in rags, and then they said that it just makes all the kids look desperate, and that's not the kind of tone that they want to convey. They want something that's a little bit more aspirational. Okay. All I'm saying there is it can be a bit of a minefield in terms of what? Beliefs, attitudes, ideological stance. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so you can convey a lot of really awful stuff in the way that you draw. And if you look at a lot of textbooks, and I'm talking about textbooks post-1994, it was absolutely devastating to be working in the industry. You would have 2 or 3 illustrators that you could use again and again and again. And then what happens there? Everybody looks the same. So the kids get these books, and then, oh, people in history look like the people in science, look like the people in English. Okay, so you don't want that either, because you want that diversity. Luckily, the pool has grown, but one thing that the South African Book Fair keeps on stressing is illustrators, and saying that there's a huge, huge shortage of them. And the people who struggle most to get, because all the rich companies grab all the really good artists, and we're not really developing enough artists for the new entrants into the market to use. Okay, so I'm generalizing now. Okay, but it can be a bit of a minefield. All right, so okay. So we've spoken about the way a person looks, variety, expression, clothing, stance of body, interaction with others. What else? Okay, so if your author's written a very sparse kind of description, what would be your choices there? And what would you base them on?
The text must actually adequately describe the artwork or the image.
Okay. So let's say my author is now, my author did this book, and now my author's retired and has lots of time. And it's a different scenario from if my author's busy writing the next level, is now busy trying to get the manuscript in, and okay. At that point, you might decide that you, as the editor, you need to beef up the brief yourself. Okay, you've got the manuscript, you know what things are about, and you may decide to beef it up yourself. You may have to beef it up yourself. Okay, so as an editor, you need to be visually very literate and become more and more literate as you go on. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Okay, so there's a lot of involvement with artwork for editors. You should check that every single graph matches the text. But if it gets to a very high level, then what does it imply in terms of the kind of editor that a company must employ? That they're a subject specialist. Okay. Because you can at that level say, you know what, you're the expert in this, you're the world authority, I really can't take responsibility for this graph, I don't know. I mean, you can work like that to some extent, but ideally it's better to actually have someone who's, if it's science or geography, someone who's a scientist or a geographer or an archaeologist or whatever. So subject expertise is also important there. But for most of what you'll be editing, it's actually not going to be a big deal, whether you're doing an annual report for a company or a school textbook. I mean, it's not. You just need to be very specific, very focused. Okay. Okay, anything else that you can think about? What else do you want to tell your artist? What else do you have? You want to have variety, okay? So Sometimes when there's a big rush to get a submission into the government department, people use like 3 different artists in the same book. Could there be an advantage to that? Disadvantages?
Well, style can, variety is nice, but you don't want someone to be using some like faded watercolored colors and then someone else to be using bright bold colors.
Oh, that is such a good example. Yeah, that's exactly what you get. So, for me, the only time that this works is when you've got a storybook with different stories in it, and then you can illustrate every story through a different artist. But sometimes that's what you have to do, and then you can rectify it later. Okay, but it's better to have, but you need to think about it, If you've got some drawings and some photographs, it's not a big deal because you've already got your variety in a way. Okay, so you'll have less demand for line drawing. Okay. What about the artwork size? How big it should be on the page? Okay, so you need to know what kind of book you're busy editing. What's its size? What will it look like? Is it an A4? Is it a much smaller format? Oh, another kind of book, like a children's encyclopedia, you can have someone doing the people artwork and somebody else doing the technical artwork. That also works quite well if you've got those kinds of things. So there, you almost have to use different people, artists, for the different types of artwork. So that also gives you, it makes the project much more manageable. Okay, so how big it's going to be? Yes, how it's going to be drawn? Watercolor, full color. What else? What else on the page? Okay, you saw from your markup that you say artwork such and such near here, showing that, okay, the pic needs to come here, more or less. Okay, so here's the text and it matches the text and it should be dropped here. Or it comes just before a description and you need to look at the picture, it has to be dropped here. Okay, so we did that when we did the markup. So what else? What about portrait or landscape? Okay, and it's important that they draw it correctly. So what I was saying about cropping a photograph because there's all this extra detail on the edges that you don't want can be reversed. So for example, you may want a landscape because you don't only want a central something, but you want the whole thing. So maybe you're illustrating a farm and you don't just want to show the poultry run, okay? You want to, sorry, I'm starting to think of the Nkandla thing. You want to show the whole setup. Okay. So somehow the artist is, so if you go landscape, it's very helpful. You could also have a design where you have a full page portrait. Okay, so think of how much needs to go into the pic. How much room are you going to allocate for it? What sort of stretch? Do you want stretch this way? Do you want stretch that way? Okay, so that's that. Okay, then the references. Let's go on to those. Okay, so you want those to be as close as possible. All right, so if it's the artwork of Benin in a certain historical period, it's not okay to supply any old Benin artwork. Okay, there's some very, very beautiful masks and a sculpture from Benin. But those have a period. Okay, and I mention this particularly because of an assignment that I set once, and I got back, whatever, here you are. And it's incorrect, okay? So you have to make sure that what has been supplied is appropriate. It's within the dates. Within the dates is really, really important. Within the climatic zone is another thing that is important. I don't want to see rain on the high veld when what we are talking about is Southeast Asian monsoon. Okay? It doesn't look the same. It's not the same. The vegetation's different. So it cannot be approximate. It has to be very, very accurate. Okay, so in reality, the question of how much work you as the editor end up doing varies. Okay, what's the time frame? How late was the manuscript? When is the submission? How much money do I have to produce this book? Is the author dead or alive? Is the author too busy to attend to this now? Do I have the expertise to do it? If the author's died, who else can I find? What other person can I find to supply me with the correct technical diagrams, etc., etc.? Okay, but the text isn't all you do, so the artwork is also important. Any questions? Yes.
Is there ever a case where an editor might have to edit a photo or an image?
Yeah. In the old days, they used to use this, they used to make photocopies, and then they used to put tracing paper over it. And then they used to mark the things on the tracing paper, and it was all very... Oh, and they would also expand and shrink based on the photocopier and do all those kinds of things. These are really basic, but I don't think you need to learn that anymore. I mean, it's a nice skill to have, but just understand the basics of photographs. Okay? Sometimes with artwork, you can explode. You have exploding artwork. Sounds crazy. Okay. What would that be? Okay, so let's say you have a picture of a plant. And then you want to see a close-up, so you can actually have things exploding out of your basic drawing. And sometimes you can do it through photographs because you manage to find all the pieces, and sometimes you have to do it through illustration. Okay, so let's say I'm trying to describe all the biomes of South Africa, and my map is only this big, but I've got space on the outside. I could even do the labels coming out. Okay, so there are a lot of ways of making information fit onto your artwork. There's also a thing called a double page spread. Do you know what that is? Double page spread. Okay, so listen, you've got a map and you want to illustrate all the biomes, and then you need to show the basic vegetation of each biome and the typical animals to be found there. Okay, so your double page spread is brilliant, because you put your map in the middle and then you explode each region to the side or up or down, showing those particular traits. Okay, so that's something that you need to be able to brief as well, if necessary. Okay. Okay. Double page spread, full out. That means you take up the whole of the 2 pages. And sometimes that's what you need in educational material. Or you could just have the top section, the top half, or the bottom half. Okay, sometimes you will have artwork that actually doesn't go the whole width of the 2 pages. It will stop sort of here and then leave you white space. And then you can decide what to do with the white space. Can you fit text into it? The designer will have to work around that. But it's got to work. It can't just look like it's been stuck together like that. Okay, so when you do the proofreading later, you're going to check that everything that's been done by the typesetter works. Okay, it doesn't look appalling. the artwork isn't too tiny, in which case you have to say, you need to reset this, you need to redo that. Okay, so when you're proofreading, we've been doing the symbols, but when you're proofreading, you actually need to look at how does it look visually. Small things like, does it say 30 and then kilos? 30 at the end of the line, kilos, they shouldn't be split like that. They should be together. So you need to move your 30 to the next line. Little visual things like this, your widows, your orphans, all that kind of stuff. And then big things, like is this pic clear? Is it showing anything? Has a mistake been made here? Was it supposed to be hippo and somehow an elephant has crept in instead? Okay, so all those kinds of things. So does it make sense? And do the visual and the word components fit for a pleasing result at the end? Okay, are there ugly white spaces? White space is good, right? I'm sure you've been taught this. White space is great because it helps reading and it makes things feel less dense and less heavy. But that can also, white space that's just left there for no good reason also can look absolutely awful. Okay, anything else? You're going to be doing an artwork brief, right? So, any questions? Size doesn't have to be, in the old days the editor was supposed to say so many millimeters by so many millimeters. Now we just go half a page, quarter of a page, third of a page. It's fine. People can deal with that. Okay, so there's a lot of expertise lost, but on the other hand, there's a lot of time gained and a lot of cost avoided. Okay. Have I left anything else? Don't think so.
You said something about references.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. References. Okay, they need to be exact, they need to be clear, they need to be properly researched. So what I went on to indirectly was to say, I don't want to see something that's a similar plant. I want to see that plant that is mentioned, that tree, not an approximation. If it's called, if it's named, it needs to be an exact match. Okay. So I'll tell you why we end up doing so much work as editors, because actually it's faster to just get it done. Then it's done. You do it yourself, because going back to the author all the time can be an absolute pain. And you may still not have a very good result. You may have a fabulous result. I've worked with brilliant authors that cannot provide you with enough material. If the drawing isn't good enough, they will give you another 5 drawings until it's completely right. Okay, they are dedicated, they love their subject, they love their reader, they want their reader to benefit to the maximum. And yeah, and then you get the others. And some of them are lazy, and some of them are ignorant, and some of them don't really care too much, and you've got to work out what sort of animal you're working for. The worst thing for me is the person who can never stop. Okay, they can never stop giving you more information, they can never stop. You've kind of put the drawing in, the artist has drawn the drawing, everybody's happy, but no. Okay, so now it's just not right. And they can't give you what it is, but it's just not quite right. So we had that with the drawing of artificial insemination of a cow once, and we nearly died. I mean, this hand was never quite in the right place, and it was transverse, cut through the cow, and we'd say, okay, right, please draw it, show us exactly where. And then they'd send, most of the time they'd just send the same drawing. They didn't know themselves, but they wanted us to get it right. Okay, so we had lots of laughs, and lots of hysteria around this thing. And eventually we went to print and they were still not happy, but we said, sorry, you can't give us anything better. And we looked up other books as well. Now, you guess what? The other books also very confusing as to how this is actually done and achieved. In a cut through from the side. So, there we are. So sometimes with the best of intentions you have to give up, but the whole thing is to try and get it right. Okay, especially educational material, instructional material of any kind. You have to pay particular attention. Okay, what do you think your responsibilities are when you look at rough artwork, which I said in that kind of book actually needs to be not so rough. Needs to be pretty finished. What will you be looking out for? Do you want to avoid? What do you want to avoid? Do you want to avoid getting the wrong artwork? Artwork that isn't 100% right at the end. So, what can't you say at that stage? You'll be looking at it even more intensely than you'll be looking at final artwork, right? You'll be looking at it manically because you don't want to get the wrong final artwork. It's been colored in, painted, everybody's like delighted that the whole thing is done, and then now you have to. So, we had an amazing one at one time at Macmillan. There was a typo in the brief. And it was a mathematics book, and it said, draw an angle, draw a large angle. Okay, so it was vague. Anyway, it said, draw a large angel. And as true as goodness. So it was a beautiful angel, and it had a great little halo. It was very cute, but it was just, so
a weird request.
I know, so, but we decided, you know what we decided? We pondered it long and hard, and we decided that artists get very bored drawing angles. So I must have thought, geez, something really exciting to draw now. We also had a wonderful, wonderful artist. I loved her work. It was sort of slightly cartoony, and beautiful, and very inclusive, and the kids were treated like with great respect. But she would show these shopkeepers and various people about town with cigarettes hanging out their mouths and things like that. So they looked like people in real life, but it wasn't okay for a school book.
It was an ancient book.
No, well, it wasn't. You know what I mean. What were we saying the other day? A lot of these school books are so preachy and precious, and we were talking about literature. And obviously, look, it is problematic. Okay. So, funny, but her publisher and I both wanted to retain the characters in the book, and the overall publisher said absolutely. The publishing director said, "I want those, we don't know." So that's what we had to do. Okay, maps. Okay, maps are a whole kettle of fish of their own. I'll stop after this, we'll have a break. Okay, so maps have got to be accurate. Okay, now talking about inappropriate references, here's a brilliant example. You want a map of Southern Africa showing the countries. Okay, just Southern Africa and the countries of Southern Africa. So all you need is a map, and you need national frontiers, and you need the name of the country. But here comes this reference, and it shows you all of that, and it also shows you elevation above sea level. Okay, so you have all the shading, and then it also shows you the entire rail network. Okay. And it's fine, so you send it off and you just want the countries of Southern Africa. And what you get back is what you sent as a reference, which is the entire railway network, all the elevation, plus the barriers and the, you know, the... Okay, so that's a very, very good example of how a reference can go wrong and has to be accurate. And let me tell you, they will put it on their machine, they will copy it ad infinitum, and on everything to do with Southern Africa, whether it's exports, elevation, main towns, secondary towns, vegetation, whatever, you will have the flipping railway lines. Okay, which now take up space, and instead of making everything clear, obscure the other things. Okay, so that's a good example, and it happens all the time with maps. Another thing with maps that can go wrong is the scale. Okay. Especially if you have a map and it's done to the scale. Let's say the scale is correct. It's 100 kilometers per centimeter. Okay, that's your scale. The cartographer draws it properly. It gets plonked in the book, and then everybody goes, but it's so squashed. You can't have it like this. We must have it bigger. Because the words, okay, so the map goes bigger, but what happens is, sorry about this old machine groaning at us. What happens is, okay, it's dead now. It probably won't come back to life. So it's done, but except that the scale is not adjusted. Okay, so you do this whole exercise in the whole class, the teacher says, and the distance now between Johannesburg and Cape Town is 500 kilometers, because you haven't, okay. You know those things where you take your ruler and, I used to hate that. And you'd measure the distance between based on the scale, but because the scale hasn't been adjusted, then the whole exercise is a waste of time, and you've actually taught the kids the wrong thing. Okay. So, very important. Don't have too many features at once. Make sure your scale is right. State what your scale is. Draw a little scale. What else do you need on a map? Just like a table must have a table descriptor, a map must have a title. So, you're going to call it elevation of, above sea level of, in this region, or whatever. Just state what it is. Even if it seems to be obvious, just give it its title. Okay, it's got its title, its scale. What else might you want? So let's say you've got roads and railways, which this time you do want, and you've got national roads and main roads that aren't national roads. How are you going to show all of that? Are you guys cold? Is it cold in this room? Huh? I can see you hiding yourselves. Yeah. It's time to get up. I'm almost done.
I thought it would be done by like colours or thicker than a line.
Yes, but what you need? A key. Thank you. Okay, so sometimes it's not that easy to tell, you know, what it is. They look different, but you know, what are they exactly? Okay. Another thing is, you've got a map and it's this big, and then you've got major towns, and the artist has put in these great big circles to show where every town is. Okay, you don't need that. You need a delicate little circle, not a... Okay, so all those things actually matter. How do you read it? How accessible is it? Is it giving your young reader extra work? Because that's completely off-putting. Okay, that's why you don't want, I mean, I remember reading to my son when he was tiny, and the picture wouldn't match the text, and then it was like a whole number. You know, because where was the truth of the story? Was it here or was it there? So, and that is paramount when they're tiny, and then becomes a little bit less so, but not that much less so. And I've seen this, I can say, so-and-so, you know, he's been in a car accident and now he can't walk properly and he comes to school in a wheelchair. And then if you look at the picture, the kid's not in a wheelchair, the kid's on these crutches. Okay, and that is, do you know what I'm saying? We can deal with that when we're older. And maybe we're happy that the picture does its own thing and the text does its own thing because we think that's more interesting. But not for the little guys. Okay. Cost? Costly. The more illustrations, the more money. And you need lots of them. So that's the very last thing I'm going to say. You may get a loving author and he's produced or she's produced a wonderful brief. And every last little thing in the book is illustrated right. Does it have to be? Is the artwork there? Is it really fulfilling a purpose? Some artwork is purely decorative, nice to have. Nice to have is not something you can really afford to do most of the time. Okay. Very few books can afford nice to have. It must be performing a function. It can be beautiful. I'm not saying it must be ordinary and not beautiful. Of course it can be beautiful. But it must be performing a role. Okay, sometimes it adds nothing. So before the artist goes to all the trouble of producing it, to say, and tell your author, we can't do 52 artworks for one chapter. You know, it will have to be 36. We feel that you brief these and they perfectly fit, you know, perfectly good enough. Or you've briefed 15 and of those, 12 are appropriate. You can have 3 more, but you've got to send us the brief by 2 days from now. It's a dialogue. So there's money and there's time and there's trying to make the best of what you've got, and there's dialogue. And the more dialogue you can have, the happier everybody will be, but it's not always possible to carry on and on having your dialogue. You've got to learn at some point. And when you're new to the profession and you're not quite sure what to do, and some authors can be pretty intimidating, you need to ask your superior. Don't be shy. Just say, I'm not sure, and they'll love you for it. They say, oh, they're thinking about what they're doing, you know, so it's never really, you know, unless you happen to have someone horrible, but you won't. People will be very happy with that, yes.
About the map, I presume that the number of colors would relate to the cost of the book. So would there be a restriction?
No, once it's in full color. Okay, so what you want to avoid is glossy paper with like very, very high colored artwork. Okay, that's expensive. But once you're using full color, if you're using it throughout the book, then you cost for that. Sometimes people, what they do is they cost for full color artwork in certain sections. Okay, so you might have a book on agriculture and then you just do line drawings. Everything's just black and white line drawings and it's fine. And then you get to the middle section and here you have your pear trees, your cabbages, your thing, you know, in all their glory for a few pages in color. So that can just be a color section. So that's how you, but it's not the how many colors, because once you've gone past the 1 color or the 2 color.
It's expensive anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so it's how many of them you do. But the cost of colors come down a lot. It really has. We went from doing horrible books for the schools, with horrible little drawings, all black and white and just a cover in color, to doing, they kind of started demanding color for everything. So we gave them color. You know what, at the end of the day, it wasn't such a big deal. And it made all the difference to the children's books, I think. So color, don't assume it's going to break the bank. Do the sums. Get the information. Don't turn your back on it. Okay. No one want to have a little stretch? Yeah. That was pretty intensive, I think. Okay. If you can't make the final lecture,
Sorry?
if you can't make the final lecture, I'm happy to coach people on the by telephone or by
Thank you.
ringing. Yeah, you
I
seem
am-
pretty. Yeah, no, you seemed upset by it, so it's
No,
fine.
not at all.
Okay.
I need to tell work in advance. So I was just trying to see if you had
Yes.
like a maybe date that I can just start telling them.
I thought everybody's happy with that.
Yeah.
Did you see?
Yeah.
But if you can't, and I always say that it's a learning experience. So while I'm not doing your assignment for you, I'll answer lots of questions on it.
Yeah. No,
And at the end of the day, people don't actually ask me that many questions, but occasionally someone will write me a really silly query, silly, which they think is silly, and then I'll answer one or two of those, and then that's it. It just sets them on their course. You know, they sort of just find their way. Shem, I'm sorry you're so cold.
Oh no, I'm not cold. I'm actually just trying to like just stand and move a little bit
Okay.
because I sit all day. So
It's only what you do.
it maybe subconsciously might be cold.
It was so nice seeing you all at the fair, not
Yeah.
sitting in this little bleak classroom. I don't know why we've got to have this ugly. Well, I suppose the blinds are beautiful compared to the grey things we used to have.
Yeah.
But still, okay. Okay, let me see if I can return this to life. This is so tedious. I don't feel like doing this.
Can I quickly ask you a question?
Yes.
Wilson, Lever, and I, the master students.
Oh, yes, yes.
For this last question,
Mm.
so we each sent each other work, but it was interpreted very differently. So can I just quickly clarify what you meant so that I can make sure that mine is? So you said use of talking heads artwork in text schoolwork. What might this consist of? Think of length, font, visuals. So the length of the text in the speech bubble, the font of the text in the speech bubble, the faces of the talking head. That's what you meant. Sorry, I got stuff that was like.
No, it's horrible working with that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying anything about Wilson's work, because
No, not
I probably, find it interesting in its own way, but it's always so,
Yeah, I think.
I don't know,
Nerve-wracking.
my son refused to work in a group at school. He said he was doing all the work. I went to the teacher and said, you never intervene, you know that I'm the only one doing work. And he said, I'm going to take a walk now, and I'm not doing it again.
Doesn't sound as fun.
And that's how I feel.
Because I have to be
But you've got to do a little bit of it. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. We have two, where one is what I've just said to you, and then another which is like.
It's fine. That's
Video
absolutely
is
fine.
so-
I'm absolutely fine with that. Okay.
Okay, I'll email it to you as soon as I get home then.
That's perfect.
But I don't understand how 250 to 300 words is going to be 40 points. Because I only found one source. So if it's heavily
Oh, I'm going
dependent
to be
on.
generous.
Okay.
You know what? It's very fine if you're setting an essay. So the honor students will do this and the master students will do that. But doing it at this level is actually quite difficult. And I have to. So So I'm going to look at it as a sort of a,
Because the one
look, have you engaged with it? What have you looked at? What have you got to say?
it's not as good scheduled when you
It's not going to be,
and
or really isn't.
I think it's.
And you should, you know what, you should phone me about these issues.
I was happy that
I had thought about it, but
Yeah.
we only, so because we had so many other assignments, we had only
I
done it
know.
on a Monday, and
Yeah.
then it was a.
That's fine. But please feel free, you know, it's not, that's,
And I think we went
it's
like
not
50 words.
testing things, it's fine. It's fine, these are approximations, you know, mustn't take them literally.
and then do Skype calls and
I mean, even with the last assignment, you know, if, you know, one of your sections is really weak, but all the others are good, you're going to look for the way to pull you down. Do you know what I'm saying? I'll write it in your report. It was pop. I'm only giving you so many marks, but I won't, even if it's worth more. There's no way I'm going to do that, because I'm going to look at how you approached it. But I want to see a minded work. It's not about, I mean, 17 edits, 17 people, 17 edits. I mean, I've looked at something that I did sometime 2 years ago, and I thought it was perfect when I handed it in. And now I'm thinking, actually, you're a bit long-winded. You could have really cut this down a lot more, you know, so...
Yeah.
And then you feel guilty because you charge people money. But
I just had minor heart failure because I saw the work that I was doing. I was like, this isn't what I did. This is definitely what I did.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
I thought we'd have to redo it and send it to you.
No, no. It's about finding a way. I mean, the whole of editing is like that. There's certain things that you must be aware of, but, you know, you get a bad artwork brief, you're gonna fix it your way, and somebody else will fix it their way. And at the end of the day, the kids are going to be happy because they're going to understand it. You know, you might end up beautifying your... I mean, the artists might just love the water cycle and go mad, drawing little faces in the little water droplets, you know, and somebody might not. Do you know what I'm saying? So maybe in your brief you asked for little faces in the droplets. Maybe you didn't, but it doesn't at the end of the day.
Thank you.
And it's hard to know exactly what's appropriate to an age group. So having teaching and having your own kids, it also makes you... I would never have attempted this if I hadn't had a child of my own. Do you know what I'm saying? So, yeah. It came from reading lots of lovingly put together books. And you think, hey, these people who sit there and write this book and then do the drawings, they're so astounding. Thank God they exist. Some of the artwork in children's books, I don't know if you've had a look. It's such high quality art.
I have.
Beautiful. Okay. All right, so guys.
The whole book. Literally, like not even...
you carry the world better than I do.
I could survive. Like if you needed, I could like survive
Are we all back?
like a few days and be okay.
I could also okay, no, at this stage.
Choose one. That's all. That's all.
Not yet.
What does that say? I tried to, I couldn't see what it said, and I couldn't really tell if it was because it wasn't super clear. I couldn't see the actual.
Okay. So what I've got here is a chapter. It's a bit gloomy, the subject, sorry. Okay, so this was a whole book that was commissioned by the Legal Centre of University of Pretoria, and they have a whole legal rights. They have a whole legal rights centre. Legal. Is that right? No. Human rights. Thank you. Yes. Well, it's more or less the same thing. I mean. So, okay. So they had commissioned 10 people from 10 different African countries to write on the topic of child marriage. Okay, and the child marriage what the situation is in the particular countries. So it was everything from South Africa to Kenya to Malawi to Mauritania to Cameroon. You know, there was a whole big range. And at the end, I loved doing it because I discovered that there were all these amazing little NGOs. So you have these situations where you have predominance of early marriage. Okay, most girls being married before 18. In one country, it was 75% of girls were married before the age of 18. So, and then you have these people who are trying to make a difference. And sometimes there are like 4 or 5 of them in this NGO, but they go and talk to people in villages and they talk to chiefs. And you're kind of gobsmacked at the end of it. You know, what they come up with and all that sort of stuff. So I like doing it. I like the topic. They posted everything up. Some of them were in French and some were in English. So it was kind of available to a lot of people, and it was on their website, and it stayed there for a while, and it was all worthwhile research. Okay. The reason I'm giving it to you now is I want us to start having a look. I'm going to send it to you via email, but I just wanted to give you an into it. I want us to look at it. What would we do, just at a glance? So let's say you're given this. And this one is one of the chapters in the book. There was also an introduction. So let's take this as fairly typical, and I've taken the one on Mozambique because there are language issues. It was written by a person who's Portuguese speaking, but who has good English, so it was written in English. Okay. And how would you charge for it? Because I'll tell you my story here. At the end of the day, we had to take out, can you see that? I removed the, yeah. So we had to take out these images because they wanted to right resolution, and okay. And then everybody did a map. I don't think Mozambique did a map, but Uganda had a multicolored map, and it was beautiful, but everything was done differently, so we had to have everything redone by one person, so it had a feeling of uniformity. So when I took this on, I thought that the person who was briefing me, I mean, she'd been part of lots of funded research into human rights. And she said, yes, I've done this, and you know, this is one of my favorite ones because it deals with women's issues and blah, blah, blah. And then, but the way she was talking, it was like they'd done this before, they had briefed outside people before, etc., etc. So when she said to me, it's got to be done quite soon, I thought she'd have a sense of how long it would take me. Okay, so I'm talking about this because communication is everything in these things. But all right. So I had a look. And I looked at their house style, and I thought their house style didn't cover a quarter of what needed to be covered. So I was going to Pretoria, and I thought I'd pop in, and I arrived unannounced in her office. And we had a chat, and everything seemed fine. And then I said to her, you know, your house style doesn't really cover everything. Can I have a look at a couple of books on your shelf and take the books home so I can see what you've done? And anyway, I took them home, and I could see, for the footnotes, especially the academic footnotes, they were all over the place. Everybody, no one was following the style. They had a very pared down style without punctuation, which I can show you later. But and then what emerged over time is that actually they'd never given work to a freelancer before. Everything was done in-house. And actually, they didn't really know anything about publishing, because if you looked at their books, the content was good, the basic content was good, but the headings looked different. They were, so the leading would vary from page to page. The footnote style was kind of, what's the most common one? Harvard. Yeah. But variations of Harvard, but they're not applied consistently. So actually, as an academic, as a scholarly publication, it was really lacking. Okay, and then, I mean, they were amazed at how much time it took me to get through all these mistakes. So I felt that, I don't think they would have paid me anymore because they were funded by some agency, and I think that's what they had in the budget, but they had no idea. And I don't know that I would have taken this on because this project carried on and on and on, and it was never going to be enough money. It was all going to have to come just from, you know, behaving decently. And while that is fine, you actually want to avoid that situation as an editor. Because when I say time and more time and more time, I mean it. I mean weeks. You know, and then you're not earning anything else and you feel you have to finish the job. So actually, it's easy to think that all is well when really all is absolutely not well. So I made an assumption. I made an assumption that somebody who's been in that kind of field for 10 years or so actually has some idea of the editing process. And she was very happy with the results. She said it was great, but, you know, I mean, it was great for them, but it wasn't great for me. Okay, so I just want to have a look. I want you guys to avoid that. You need to be like a little bit dry-eyed and tough in negotiations. Okay, so, all right, so often in these things when you get pictures, well, you can leave them in, but usually you'll be asked to take them out. What would you do? Who knows how to take these pictures out without making a mess? It can get pretty messy. The spacing can go all wrong. So my advice is just leave it in, but write little notes saying, please, typesetter, please remove this. Okay, leave it to somebody else who knows the program. Okay. You've got the name of the person. What about this page 0? So if it's all chapters in a book, what should this page be? 1, yeah. It won't be little 1 because that's for your prelims for the whole book. So it will actually start on a right-hand page and it will be page 1. Okay. But never mind about that now. Okay, do you notice anything strange about these contents if you just look at this? Yeah, that K. What is it doing? So you're going to find it later. It's there. Okay, what about the basic thing? Does it look?
The whole numbering is very,
The whole numbering's out, hey? So you know immediately that if Microsoft Styles has been applied, it hasn't been done properly. Okay? To me, it looks as if half of it's using the automatic numbering and then half of it's other stuff added in to the table. Okay, so that's a problem, and that could take a while to fix. Okay? List of tables. Indentation, yes.
Font types.
The fact that the sentence, there's no place, the fact that the sentence sort of runs on under table, that's...
Okay, it's a big mess, okay? So how long do you think you're going to be here on this little table? Plus you don't really want, you know, you don't want these capitals, but anyway, that's... What about this? Everything's a mess. Look, distribution of population based on age and sex for the year 2020. Why have I got a colon? Huh? Plus, it's all these embedded things that are now freaking me out. And I've tried to take the formatting out, and it's not working. Okay, so... I've done that. Nothing works with this thing. Okay, so you're going to have to... If you don't know how to do... Yes, you can. Okay, so I have a wonderful friend who teaches at Northwest. and I send her things sometimes, or sometimes I give her a call, and she helps me because she's a pro. But I mean, so even if you phone a friend and it doesn't cost you anything, you still need to spend the time. Okay. What about these numbers here? Well, they're wrong, aren't they? What should you have here? Any ideas? Why are they wrong? Oh my goodness.
You just deleted the whole first one.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. It can be a mess. I've got the original, don't worry. Is this giving me that? Okay. Alright, so what should all of this say? Okay, I've just deleted another one. Yeah, but they're going to change. This is a manuscript. Okay, so you need to put this in at this stage. Okay? Naught. Because once it's been typeset, then you can do your stuff. Okay. You might also want to highlight this so that the person who looks at it next time doesn't miss it. Okay, so that would take you a little bit of time. All right, I'm just doing things in a very careless way, just to show you. Okay, you need to go through it and see what you're going to have. Okay, what about this? Acronyms. Okay. Now these people are all involved in, human rights. So you would imagine that it's all fine, right? Okay, so have a look at this. I'm using another one, the paper on Uganda. Is it showing me this? Sorry, it's supposed to, oh no. Just hold on, I'm getting there. Okay, view, all markup. Okay, so that was their table of contents, which I corrected just, yeah. Okay, so this was their acronyms. Okay, so can you see how many corrections I've got here? Okay, so some of it was just getting rid of capitals when it's not needed. African Girls Education Initiative, I didn't know if it took an S apostrophe or not. Okay, so I had to look that up. People's rights, yeah. Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination. Female genital mutilation, cutting, okay. Girls' education movement, I had to look those up. Everything was full of capital letters. Okay, so this is just a simple list of acronyms and see how many corrections I have in here. And I'm sure there are more that I missed. Okay. Then I get on to the numbering and it's wrong because it's not supposed to be one dot. According to their style, it's 1, then 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, 2.2, that kind of stuff. Okay, so all of those, right. Then they have forgotten here to supply the acronym for the name that is going to recur again and again. So all that is going to have to be checked. Okay, again, this incessant use of capital letters for things that don't need it. Tenses are a problem, and I'm now in Uganda, not even in the Mozambique thing. Okay, so just to say to you that it's not as if the text here is that bad. It really isn't. It's quite decent English. Okay, but you can see how much fiddling there is. Okay, so what I'm trying to say to you is when you assess a manuscript, what is a good thing to do when you're assessing it? What should you spend time on doing?
You do 1 or 2 pages, and then you
Yeah,
use that as an
1 or 2
approximate.
pages enough?
One page.
So can you see this? This has now got a stupid table highlighted in alternative which I really don't need. I'd rather have a normal table with more spaces between the entries. Okay. Okay. Okay, and then if you look at the language, the present report was drafted in the context of a regional study on early and forced marriage in Africa that the Centre for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, no comma, is undertaking in 10 African countries. 10 is supposed to be according to their house style TEN, namely South Africa, Mozambique, Cameroon, the Gambia, Mauritania, Mali, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay. All right. Is this a good opening sentence?
Well, it's a sentence or paragraph.
Yeah, it's a sentence. It's too long. Okay. What else have we got here? What's the issue? What about the countries, the order in which they're named?
Alphabetical.
Yeah, should be alphabetical. Okay. Sorry, do you want to ask something?
No, I was saying otherwise it's like trade routes.
Yeah, yeah. So exactly, yeah. That's a great way of putting it. That's a great way of putting it. If you don't put them in alphabetical order, it's like a form of favoritism. And it can end up coming across like that. I like that definition. I think it's great. Okay. The objective of the study is to inform a report of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, which will be provided to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, ACHBNOLA, in order that it may make recommendations to states based on the report.
I wouldn't capitalize states because
Yeah.
it's not the state, it's
Okay.
states.
You'd get rid of the extra
Oh, yeah,
space.
extra space.
There's more than one, so it's best to do it by hand. But of course, remember you can do Control A and then replace 2 spaces by 1, except here that it's 3 spaces by 1. Okay, what about the objective of the study is to inform a report of the Special Rapporteur which will be provided to the African okay. The present report brings the main results of the study undertaken in Mozambique. Okay. This report seeks to present the main facts concerning the early and forced marriage in Mozambique. What you notice immediately, there's a problem right through this paper with articles. So it's not the early and forced marriage, there isn't one early and forced marriage in Mozambique. So we're discussing it as a category, so in other words, the main facts concerning early and forced marriage. And you'll find in lots of places you need to supply the article, and in lots of other places you need to remove it, as well as the situation of the women's human rights in the country in relation to that issue. Okay, by the end of this paragraph, I don't know what we're talking about anymore. What issue? Early and forced marriage. You do? So something has been done to you have to tighten the sentence. Okay. This report analyzes particularly the causes of, does that sound?
Or just analyzes.
Just analyzes, yeah? Or focuses particularly on, or something, but this analyzes particularly is not kind of, you've got to do something with it. The causes and incidents of early marriage in Mozambique, the international and domestic legal framework, as well as the policy framework applicable to the issue, the jurisprudence of international and regional treaty monitoring bodies. Comma instead of full stop. But what about this? In my edit, I said this report focuses particularly on, or especially on, and then I had a colon, and then I had the different things as bulleted points. Okay, and there's a lot of that in this. Okay. Don't expect to see everything now. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, okay? This is the kind of stuff that you have to edit 3 times to really get right. And after a while of doing it, you actually start speeding up when you do that. But don't ever take on a job without dipping into it, doing little bits and pieces, even if it's allowed yourself, and See, how long is this actually taking me? How much work do I actually have to put into that? Okay, so I'm not going to quote 10 hours for a 46-page report if this is the way that it's going to go, because it's going to take me half the week, at least.
Is it possible to reject the manuscript after having accepted it?
Yeah. I wouldn't do it too often, because you might get a bad name. And not if you've let them believe for a long time, and they've got deadlines to meet, and you don't tell them immediately. So that's the problem. Making the time to actually evaluate it can be very difficult. Okay. Sorry, it's a bit of a gloomy thing to end on. Yes, please can I have your little statements?
The base order is attendance or motion?
Oh my goodness, I'm
That is always a little complicated.